through the thing. Yeah? Can I now ask two people from, to in fact present to us a Tamil case, really? So two people I'm going to invite here is, I hope I get the names right, because it's really, so you must forgive me, my tongue may not be right. Is it Jananayagam? So then, when I come, you come over and sit. And I also want to invite Sivakami Rajamohana. Is that right?
That's close.
Yeah. Please come in. Welcome. Come in. Sorry, welcome means welcome. Hello. Yeah. And then, by the way, try to speak Tamil language. Difficult. Thank you very much for coming. Now, quite rightly, Estella took a lot of time to prepare a biography. You should have a copy, frankly, because we said, and Estella is arguing a very powerful argument, that we're just calling people to speak, but these people have made contribution to the community and made contribution generally to society. So speakers over here, they have a standing, intellectual standing in everything. So if you look at Jananayagam, there is a biography. She just said that she's a part of, am I right, Tamils Against Genocide,
yes.
TLG, and she studied at the University of Manchester, and he's done computing information systems. She won't be without a job, I can assure you, and applied mathematics as well. And in 1995, Jan co-founded something called HERD, which is Human Rights Organization, and she's a leading member of Tamil Genocide, Tamil Against Genocide, and the director of the Law Foundation. True? Okay, so there's a lot of achievement. And more so, she became engaged, I think, in politics over here. And she was an independent candidate for the London region of 2009 European Parliament elections. I hope you had a very good election, because I thought you got 2.86%, 50,000 people voted for you, which isn't bad, because there's an independent candidate as well. So, so I can just, I will introduce Sivakami later. You've taken enough from me. I'm going to give John 10 minutes to make a presentation. Over to you.
And all of you would have seen the killing fields, which Charles Ford has done. And I'm going to try and speak louder. I hope, so everyone I hope has seen the killing fields. And I'm going to focus slightly differently. I mean, Sri Lanka has been independent for 60 years, and periodically you have these mass violence, episodes of violence. But the thing that one has to look at is that those episodes of massive violence, such as the killing field, occur in a particular context, which we say is an enabling context, a context that allows them to happen. Right? And that it's the context that I want to focus on, and what I think that, and that context is both domestic and international. So there's two aspects to that. So with the framing of this, as has already pointed out, the framing of the situation in which this violence occurred was clearly a war on terror. That was the Western, that was one framing of it. So I'm going to look at an alternate framing of it. And I think that, I would use for an alternate framing an older, not in the UN Convention sense of the word genocide, but an older, original sense of the word genocide. So I'm going to just read that definition, and that's the definition of genocide that's given by the person who came up with the term. It's Abertzale, he's a Jewish scholar who escaped Poland in the Nazi period. And so what he says is, generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of the nation. So he doesn't actually think of, he wasn't thinking of 2009 when he coined the term. What he was thinking of, right? He said it is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of the essential foundations of life of the national group, with the aim of annihilating the group aspect. Right. So he, went to explain a bit more about what is the objective of such a plan. It would be the disintegration of political, cultural, social, and institutions of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and so forth. So it's really the institutionalized aspect of the community that is being destroyed in this original definition. And ultimately, after breaking down the institutional aspects, you would come to physical security and threats to life and person. So it's actually through this definition that I'm going to look at the 60-year history of Sri Lanka, and I think that history is an enabling history. It was only because of the history that it's possible to have the episodes such as 2009. I don't accept that they sort of occur randomly or as collateral damage from a particular kind of war or war on terror. I don't actually accept that it occurs in that random fashion, so I think it has to be an explanation of the historical process. Right? So when we look at the definition, just to see how the definition applies, or all the definition applies, when you talk about the essential foundations of life of a national group or a community, what do you really mean? And how do you, if you want to destroy the essential foundations of life of a community, what are the actions you might take? And if you want to look at that, I think pretty much everything that has been happening in Sri Lanka, all of the things that we complain about, to me fit this pattern. Right? So this alternative framework is a bit smarter than the war on terror because it's actually very comprehensive. It explains a lot more, in my opinion. So for example, we look at physical security. It's a very fundamental, essential foundation of life for any community, security. And so we look at arbitrary disappearances, abductions, torture, indefinite detention, PTA kind of habeas corpus rights, issues like that. And we say, looking at those, that they're in fact, they're not arbitrary, they're not random, they're actually a targeted pattern of creating physical security. They're deliberate. That their objective would be to create physical security. So in that sense, I would like to quote actually Sivaram. I know Sivaram was the editor of Tamulet, Sivaram, who was abducted and killed. But he had this to say about torture, arrest, and detention. He said, arrest, detention, and torture, all indiscriminate, destroy the basis of civil society. Right? All this denies one's sense of rights. You want people to lose track of the idea that they have rights of any kind. You reduce them to the point where staying alive becomes their highest priority. And I think this destruction of community institutions, of communication infrastructure, of the continuous displacement, almost everything that we see in the difficulty in getting legal redress, the impunity, all of that actually meets this, this whole definition of reducing people to a point where staying alive becomes their highest priority. And I would say that current in Sri Lanka post-war, although again this context is one of peace, what we are really seeing behind the scenes would be essentially this issue that people are in the north and east, which is militarily occupied, are in this position where really staying alive is their priority. And how is this achieved? I mean, I just expand a little bit more. Of course, there's massive displacements, internal displacements, and that we've seen that throughout the war. There was short-term displacement during the war, but if you look at the peace talks, and during the peace talks, there were people, tens of thousands of people, who have been displaced for 20 years. They've never managed to be resettled. But the question is, why was that happening? Because that goes to psychological insecurity. And of course, now again, the critical issue is resettlement. People are not allowed to go back, not able to go back to militarized zones. Right? So this is psychological, insecurity. It goes to the foundations of life. But other than that, also communication, for example, people, a lot of rights organizations see these issues in isolation. So you have the media organizations which talk about media rights, and they see it in isolation. But I don't see it in isolation. I actually see it as part of the process of breaking down infrastructure of a national group or a community. And so Sri Lanka, thus it's unsurprising that it actually has the highest, one of the highest rates of attacks on media workers. And more interestingly, if you break that down by region, it's even more unsurprising that actually it's very, if you scale it up by the population of the regions without military control, I think that would be, so the problem is national, but if you actually start breaking it out regionally and ethnically, it's severe. So going back to that, and if you look at even other things, for a national group or a community to exist, it must have an identity, a sense of identity, and how do you, a sense of history. And there's so many acts that Sri Lanka, the state, the armed forces have done which actually destroy the sense of identity. Everything from 1981, burning down the Japan Library, 90,000 books, vast section of history, to the present time where they are destroying memorials, graveyards, for example. I mean, it doesn't actually make sense why you destroy graveyards, but it is actually changing history, changing road names, and very simple things. The signs, the village names, I mean, in 10, 20 years, you won't be able to recognize the historical context of this place. So what is the enabling environment? I'm going to be short of time, so I'll very briefly touch on the enabling environment internationally. And I think what is clear, obviously, for this audience, is legislation. I mean, the legislation, in fact, universal jurisdiction is very interesting because it does apply both ways. You know, you can bring a Sri Lankan army general for torture claims here, but in practice it's very, very difficult to achieve, and so it does bias, and it is a biased legislative framework in the sense that if you look at the war, if you look at what was happening in Channel 4 during the killing fields, the government had blockaded food into the areas that it was attacking, which is a war crime, crime against humanity. But in fact, if you were sending food into that area, in the US, in US law, there would be material support, because the area was controlled by the LTT. So that's where you see the asymmetric bias and very innocent things like sending computer training, providing computer training into the areas controlled by the LTT at the time to control them, would be in fact criminalized. And people are currently being prosecuted in the US. In fact, the first prosecutions in the US relating to Sri Lankan war are not for the massive war crimes that we've seen on Channel 4, surprisingly. They're actually for students who sent computer equipment into the Mongol region, and the Canadian students who were exiled in Canada. The level of asymmetry we see in the application of universal jurisdiction. But I think that going further, that legislation is the primary foundation, but I think that next to legislation, very closely following on, is media. I use legislation as primary because I think the media is enabled by the legislation. And the number of times the media can actually say, you know, so-and-so is a banned organization under terrorism law, and still not be biased at all because it's a factual statement. It's a factual statement. And even, you know, so the media that you might think was quite liberal would be using this. So I think that the media, so again, you know, I think maybe Suhami will be dealing with that, but I think the media context, the silence of the media, I mean, what we do have to ask ourselves, and I leave with a question for discussion, why is the killing fields, you know, being reported now 3 years later? And I mean, I don't accept the media didn't know. I think Callum McRae Channel 4 themselves accepted that all of that material, you know, the video footage that was shown last week, that was available pretty much from the beginning. And certainly there were journalists in the war zone. And so I think we would question the whole question of media. And I've got 50 seconds left, so on the media subject, I'm really going to say that the media works in specific ways. It privileges certain kinds of experts. It gives them airtime. I could not, you know, when we were using the genocide word in 2009, we were always constantly afraid of censorship. Right? And in some cases, some people like MIA and rap artists did get censored. It actually get edited out when she used the genocide word. So there's multiple areas that of the way the media actually works that we would have to understand. And I hope that goes under resistance strategies.
Thank you very much.